Welcome to Foreign Correspondents. I'm Min San-hee with today's panel of foreign journalists to delve into this week's issue of Interest. It's good to see you all.
Nice to be back.
Right, we have a new member joining today's discussion, Eva Joan. Welcome to the show. Do tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, I'm a French journalist and I've been a correspondent for French media, mostly for Libération.
Well, it's a pleasure to have you on board. Now, it's been a week since we last met, Marcus and Frank. Tell us a little bit about the stories you've covered this week.
Well, I went down to Busan to cover the International Film Festival. A very interesting week, very busy, going around to different venues, trying to find some of the Danish movie people who were down there and interviewing them. So, a busy week.
I see. What about you, Frank?
Among other things, I covered THAAD issue, the issue of a U.S. missile system coming here to South Korea. It's of a lot of interest to Iran, so I went to a couple of protests that took place over the last week of religious groups that are sort of opposed to the deployment of the U.S. missile system here.
I see. Eva?
I've been writing about the Galaxy Note 7.
Oh, okay.
The problems.
I see. Well, you've all been quite busy working, which many may regard as a blessing, especially in light of the hardships in securing a job in recent years. In fact, findings by the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development show 15% of the youth from the organization's 35 member nations are NEETs. Now, the terminology is an abbreviation of the phrase not in education, employment or training, and this unfortunate situation is the sad reality of many of our youth. Up next, we have details.
The youth unemployment rate in Korea has been on a steady rise. According to reports from Statistics Korea, the youth jobless rate reached 9.3% in August, but some argue that the real unemployment rate is much higher than official figures show.
정부 지표에다가 비자발적으로 어쩔 수 없이 비정규직에 종사하는 청년, 거기에다가 취업을 포기하고 그냥 쉬고 있는 청년까지 포함할 경우 청년 실업률이 30%를 훌쩍 넘어서게 되는 것입니다.
But this is not a problem unique to Korea. Many other countries have also long been dealing with this issue. According to the International Labour Organization, the number of jobless young people aged 15 to 24 is expected to increase by 500,000 this year, reaching a total of 71 million. Figures from a 2015 World Bank annual report are even more discouraging. Out of the 1.8 billion young people aged 15 to 29 as of 2014, 500 million were either unemployed or underemployed. Including the population of NEETs, those not in education, employment or training, actual figures are set to reach 620 million. The Director for Employment, Labour and Social Affairs at the OECD, Stefano Scarpetta, warned without efforts to boost education and training for youths, there are greater risks of seeing a divided society.
이미 사회 계층이 너무 고착화가 돼 있고 부모 세대의 서포트 없이 젊은 사람이 혼자 자기 계층을 뛰어넘는 거는 어려운 일이라고 생각합니다.
금수저라는 말이 있는 것처럼 부모님 잘 만나면은 팔자가 피고 노후 걱정 없이 살 수 있는데 대부분의 청년들은 그런 게 아니잖아요.
Without jobs for young people, society will face countless other problems, including a low birth rate, social polarization, and conflict between generations. This is why open debate about the youth unemployment crisis is a pressing issue that requires a great deal of attention.
Now, as revealed by the various reports disclosed by global entities, including the International Labour Organization and the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, youth unemployment is a universal concern. And to start off today's debate, we turn the spotlight first to Korea. Now, there are several reports here in the country that claim Korea is facing a severe problem where youth unemployment is concerned. As foreign journalists stationed in this part of the world, do you agree, Frank?
Well, I think the first thing we need to do is we need to sort of separate what kind of jobs we're talking about. When I was a young person, I worked, when I was in high school, I had part-time jobs in universities. It's a little bit different here in South Korea. High school students and university students to a lesser degree tend not to work part-time while they're studying. I think perhaps that leads to higher grades. It did when I managed to study at times and not work. But I think that there's sort of a character building idea to be gained through that type of work. Those aren't the type of jobs that we're talking about that are missing from the Korean economy. I think what we're talking about here are entry-level career jobs for those in their mid to late 20s that are looking to build and begin their real careers in the workforce.
Yes, we are. Eva, have you seen Koreans, young Koreans, finding it difficult to secure an entry-level job?
Of course. Many of my friends, young friends, just graduated friends, were or are currently looking for their first job. I think the most difficult part right now is to get the very first job. And I think what is striking is the kind of strategies that they come up with in order to get those jobs. They go to private institutes, they try to add some lines on their CV. And one thing that was interesting to me as a foreign person was the strategy to remain a student forever, even if you are done with all your classes and you have all of your credits, but you will stay enrolled at the university just to keep your status, so that when you meet your next recruiter, you don't have to justify a period of unemployment. I thought that was interesting.
Yes, that is an ongoing phenomenon here in Korea. Marcus, we mentioned earlier that this is not a problem simply for Korea. It extends beyond national boundaries to include countries around the world. What is the situation like in Denmark?
Well, in Denmark, it's not as grave as it is here in Korea, but there is a big debate in Scandinavia about what to do about youth unemployment and unemployment in general. And of course, it is closely linked to the slowing of the economy. So ever since the financial crisis of 2008, it's been a big issue in Scandinavia. How are we supposed to tackle youth unemployment? And what's the state role in this? How's the state supposed to create new state assistance for unemployment?
Right. Eva, is it the same in France?
Well, in France the situation is actually worse, much worse than in Denmark or in Korea. I believe the unemployment rate for people under 25 is close to 25%, maybe 24%. And there was a recent study from the OECD that showed that the NEET, you were talking about non-employed and none in education or training, those rates were still high in France, whereas they had declined over the past years in other countries, in most other countries of the world.
I see. So far we've addressed the status quo of youth unemployment. What do you believe is the cause of this current phenomenon? Do you see the cause with the government or the corporate sector or the youth themselves?
It could be all three, right? For me, this is a very interesting topic to cover as a journalist here in Korea, because youth unemployment is so closely linked to some of the major challenges that Korea is facing right now. So it's linked to the slowing economy, of course. One of the immediate effects of a slowing economy would typically be youth unemployment rate going up. And it's also linked to the conglomerates and the power they hold, and to the unflexible job market here in Korea.
I think what is interesting about Korea is how new that is to people, and how people felt unprepared, and specifically young people. I think they have been told for their entire life, if you study hard, you will go to a good university and you will be able to get a good job and a good life. And for the first time, this is the first generation that can't have that, and they're struggling for the first time. I think that's interesting.
Yeah, I think it's interesting also on that point. This will be the first generation, they're saying, in some countries where the children will not be better off than their parents. Why? What's the problem? Why is this taking place? I look at the greater picture a little bit at some issues surrounding globalization. You have a couple of phenomenons here. South Korea's attained a great level of progress over the last 30 or 40 years, and so as a manufacturing base, it's not as attractive to large companies. Samsung is a perfect example, to build factories and produce things here when within the region they can do so with much lower labor costs. Samsung in particular has moved a lot of factories to China because of the advantages there. Another issue that's developing that's related to globalization is technical innovation. We don't need as much labor to make a car or even to make clothing as we did previously. So there's a layer of employment that is slowly worldwide being eroded that used to employ great numbers of people.
There are some social pundits who claim that the reason for youth unemployment lies with the youth. Now, this is of course not my opinion, but there are experts who claim that the youth of today are not as dedicated or as diligent or as determined as the youth of the past. How do you respond to this?
I think you should be very skeptical to that when people are blaming the youth. I mean, people have always been blaming, older generations are always blaming younger generations for not working hard enough. I mean, there's this famous quote from Socrates 2,400 years ago where he says that, the youth of today is only concerned with luxury, they don't want to work, they don't have any respect for their elders. So, people have been saying this for thousands of years. What I think is true, though, is that there is a great deal of frustration with the younger generation, and given the current situation, they do need to think in different career paths that they have done in the past. I mean, they need to look for other options instead of trying to get employment with the major conglomerates, as it's been the traditional aspiration in Korea. They need to look for opportunities at small and mid-sized companies. They need to look into different options. Maybe they aren't trying hard enough to do that.
I agree with you certainly on that point, and I also agree with Socrates a little bit. I think that young people, when they come out of university, they're expecting to get that career lifelong position immediately, like the brass ring is going to be lowered to them. And they're a little bit unrealistic in their aspirations, their initial aspirations when they first find a job. The idea of starting from the bottom, I think, needs to be sort of reapplied to South Korean youth, particularly given such a competitive job market.
Right. There are concerns that youth unemployment will be a long-term phenomenon. And if this is the case, Eva, what do you see as the potential worst-case scenario unfolding because of youth unemployment?
Oh, that's a tough question. It's hard to predict, but for sure the fact that Korea is an aging society won't help. And the fact that the birth rate is so low, it's not going to go up if people struggle to get jobs.
Right. You mentioned like pushing off marriage and child rearing, which is a problem here in Korea because the youth are surrendering their hopes of starting a family. How do you look at this, Frank?
Well, speaking as a new parent, let's say, I can really understand these concerns, these expense concerns when you're bringing up a child. As a foreigner thinking about schooling, I'm wondering whether I want my child to go to public school or a private school or even a foreign school, which is quite expensive. And also the other issues involving housing. There's to buy an apartment here is for me really a dream. So I think that those challenges, parents, young people, new married couples, young South Koreans thinking about getting married are looking at these obstacles and just holding back, until perhaps they find that more secure position.
Right. Now, both the youth and the government have been seeking to better address the issue of unemployment. And in light of these efforts, there have been some young people who have been fortunate enough to secure jobs. Employment, however, does not appear to have solved their problems. Up next, we tell you why.
Securing a job is one of the greatest issues of concern for university students.
지금 3학년인데 졸업하고 나서 대학원이나 아니면은 중소기업에 계약직이라도 들어가서
네, 요즘 취업하기가 힘들어서 선배들 만나면 취업 이야기밖에 안 하고요.
To land a job at their company of choice, it's now become the norm for college students to work on building up their so-called specs. This would include getting good grades at school and decent scores on standardized English tests, going abroad for language courses, and doing volunteer work. On the government level, various policies have been drawn up to support youth employment. The Youth Hope Fund was created to help provide more employment opportunities. The Ministry of Employment and Labour also provides young job seekers with an employment assistance program, providing a cash allowance for the costs involved in job hunting. Despite these efforts, many young people still feel their outlook is not that bright.
이 사실 그 정부에서도 청년 문제를 해결하는 데 가장 근본적인 대책이다 이렇게 얘기하고 있고요. 9차례에 걸쳐서 이미 청년 일자리 대책을 발표했는데 실제 아시다시피 청년 실업 문제라던가 이런 지표들은 점점 더 안 좋은 방향으로.
Landing a job itself is hard enough, but another problem is that often the quality of the jobs is not good enough. This is because young people frequently end up with non-regular jobs or become contract workers. So what are some of the fundamental problems that need to be addressed to find the ultimate solution to youth unemployment? We sit down for more.
Now, as we have just seen, challenges in securing a job and maintaining that job have called for greater government efforts in helping the youth. Now, these government assistance that people are calling for range from that of financial assistance to setting up training programs or mentoring programs to better guide them. What is your opinion regarding these options?
Well, I think they definitely could help guide the young people and could help ease some of the stress that they're feeling. But when I compare what's been happening in my home country of Denmark, where there's a lot of state-run unemployment assistance programs, there's also a risk that part of the job seekers are not going to be as active or are going to spend too much of their time trying to meet the requirements that the state is setting for them, and not spending enough time trying to go and find a job.
I see. Marcus, just for the record, when you talked about the young people not being as committed to securing a job, are we talking about when they're receiving financial assistance from the government?
Right, yeah, that's what I meant. Yeah.
Okay, I see. What about you, Frank?
Well, you know, I think providing direct financial assistance that was proposed by the Seoul government is a bit of a mistake. I agree with the idea of having training programs, and I think that we need to become comfortable as societies around the world that our workforce is going to have to constantly be retrained. Our societies are developing at such a level where you can't expect to have the same job for your whole life. So we need to, I think, as societies in general, South Korea included, we need to consider constant lifelong retraining. And I think the state really could benefit society by being involved in that aspect of it, but not so much in providing direct financial assistance.
I see. Eva, I mentioned this earlier and you mentioned it because you mentioned it. You talked about France facing a very, very severe problem. What is your country doing to address the problem of youth unemployment? What are some of the existing campaigns designed to ease the plight of the young people there?
Well, I think it took two directions fundamentally. First of all, trying to promote vocational training. Just like in Korea, this is not a very popular path, and people tend to look down on those careers. The thing is that that's where there is job, and employers there have a hard time recruiting young people. So the government has been trying to promote that, and also to give incentives to the young people to choose those kind of path. And then the second thing is that the government has created some subsidized jobs specifically for the youth.
I see. You also mentioned earlier that the young people here in Korea are engaged in very interesting strategies to strengthen their specifications, so to speak, all in an attempt to sharpen their edge over the competition in securing jobs. Is it the same case in Denmark, Marcus?
Not really, no. We don't have a lot of that. So like Frank said earlier, you try to get a part-time job while you're studying. You try to get connections in the area of work where you are trying to find work once you graduate from university. And that's sort of the way to get a job in Denmark. It has always been. We don't pay that much attention to grades and resumes as you do here in Korea.
Right, we do. Which is why, Frank, quite a number of Koreans travel to Canada to enhance their language proficiency, all in the hope of securing a job in a conglomerate. How do you view this?
I occasionally hire a news assistant to work with me. It's a sort of glorified internship. And when people apply, I get their resumes, and then I'll read the resume, and based on that, if there's any chance the person I think is appropriate, I'll call them in for an interview. After I call them in for the interview, what's on the resume doesn't matter at all.
I see.
I'm going to make my decision based on what that person tells me and how I think that they can perform the work. I might give them some type of a translation test at that point, but the spec, as it's called in Korea, doesn't matter to me that much. And I'm kind of encouraged to hear here in South Korea that spec is kind of under fire. It doesn't have the same kind of respect that it once had, and I think more weight is being placed a little bit on the interview and a little bit more on the genuine skills that that person can bring to a prospective employer.
Right, and I guess if you were to give any advice to young Koreans trying to find a job at this point, I mean, it could be that you could try to be more proactive, not pay as much attention to their specs. I mean, I guess they still have to some degree, but try to build their network, trying to meet their prospective employers, present them with ideas, instead of just going through the conventional channels that you'd usually go by when you try to find a job. Try to be more creative and proactive.
Right, Marcus, you talked about conventional channels, which is precisely why a number of young Koreans are traveling overseas for employment. What are your thoughts on this, Eva? Like, there are some Koreans traveling all the way to France in hopes of getting a career in the cooking industry, or?
Yes. I think this is a global phenomenon, first of all. Young people lacking of opportunity in their own country and looking abroad. In Europe, this has happened massively, from young people in Greece or in Spain going to Germany to look for jobs. I believe what is interesting about Korean young people is that they might be going abroad to look for jobs, that's true, but they might also be going abroad to look for less competitive society and better environment. So I think that would be the thing that is peculiar about them going abroad compared to the Greek or the Spanish young people. In Korea, I believe there is, many people believe there is one type of success, one model of success, and they need to accept that that might not be the case, and that they can be proud of themselves even if they take a different path.
That is also true. Right, granted, so the work of the youth, it is the work of the youth to seek employment and to ensure a livelihood. However, it is also the work of the society as a whole to guarantee the presence of sustainable working opportunities and to allow for a greater sense of hope. And in this respect, we can say that youth unemployment is a task we need to tackle all together. Now, before we say goodbye, perhaps we can have a few words on your thoughts regarding today's discussion. We'll start with you, Frank.
Well, I think that we did a good job of discussing this issue. People sometimes forget that as foreign correspondents, we're kind of generalists. None of us are economic experts, but I felt that we shared some ideas that maybe young people might be able to look at and consider in their efforts to find that career job that they're looking for.
Eva, what about you?
Well, I would like to finish by saying that the situation in Korea is not as bad as in many other developed countries. I think, as I said before, the difference is it's very new, so people need to adjust.
Marcus?
Yeah, I think this is a very interesting issue to cover as a correspondent here in Korea, because it goes to the core of the challenges that Korean society is facing right now, and it's going to be very interesting to see how especially the government is going to handle this going forward.
Right, and on that optimistic note, you have to have confidence in your ability and then be tough enough to follow through. So said Rosalind Carter, the wife of the 39th President of the United States, Jimmy Carter. And with these words to our youth, we end this edition of Foreign Correspondents. Thank you for watching and see you next week.